There's also a disconnect between religious claims and modern values. When someone believes in equality, freedom of expression, and human rights, they may find themselves in conflict with parts of their religious tradition. When the religion doesn't evolve fast enough, or when it tries to hold on to ideas that no longer fit a changing world, it alienates the very people who care deeply about justice and fairness. Curiosity plays a huge role. People who love science, philosophy, and history are constantly exposed to alternative ways of understanding the world. They learn about the vastness of the universe, about how small and recent human life is on the cosmic timeline. They begin to see how tiny their individual religion is in the context of human civilization, and they start asking bigger questions. Why is this belief system the only correct one out of thousands? Why would truth be so geographically limited? Why would eternal salvation depend on birthplace or language? These questions aren't disrespectful. They're sincere, and when the answers rely on circular reasoning, when people are told, "It's true because it says so," that doesn't work anymore. Intelligent people recognize that truth should stand on its own, not require loyalty or fear to be accepted. Another factor is access to data. Today, people can look up patterns of belief by age, education level, and geography. They notice that the most devout regions often correlate with lower literacy, poverty, or political instability, and the least religious countries, places with higher education, healthcare, gender equality, often have better quality of life. This doesn't prove causation, but it raises questions. If religion makes people better, why are the most peaceful and prosperous societies often the least religious? Even within religious groups, many of the most educated individuals reinterpret their beliefs metaphorically. They treat stories as symbols, not literal history. And while this approach is more flexible, it also highlights something else, that belief must constantly be adjusted to stay acceptable. Intelligent people notice when doctrines shift to avoid conflict with science or ethics, and this shifting makes them ask, if truth changes depending on what's socially acceptable, is it really truth? They also recognize how belief is shaped by environment. A child born in one country is taught one religion. A child born elsewhere learns a different one. Each grows up convinced they have the truth, but the only difference was geography. That randomness feels important. It points to the idea that belief isn't chosen based on evidence, it's inherited. And for someone who values reason, that's not enough. Even the promises of religion start to feel narrow. The idea that the universe was created for humans, that everything exists with one species in mind, begins to feel small once people learn about evolution, astrophysics, and the scale of the cosmos. They see that our galaxy is one of billions, that our species is one outcome of a long, blind process. And this doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it rare, fragile, and precious. So instead of needing divine purpose, intelligent people often find meaning in connection, in art, science, relationships, in understanding, creating, and helping others. These things don't require faith in the supernatural. They require presence, awareness, integrity, and that's enough. This shift away from religion isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. It looks like someone closing a sacred book, setting it aside, and picking up something else. A philosophy text, a biology paper, a memoir. They're still searching, but in a wider field now. And it's not about being better than anyone. It's about wanting beliefs that stand up to scrutiny, that don't require suspension of thought, that don't rely on what you were told, but on what you can explore and understand. More and more, intelligent people are choosing paths that embrace uncertainty, that accept the unknown, not as a threat, but as an invitation. They're not settling for inherited answers. They're building their own slowly, honestly, and often quietly, walking away from what no longer fits. Some leave quietly, without ever saying the words out loud. Some never tell their family, Some don't even tell their closest friends. They just shift. They stop pretending. They let go of answers that felt borrowed, and they begin to trust their own questions. There's no need for conflict. No need to fight with those who believe. Leaving isn't about winning an argument. It's about walking a different road. A road where truth is something you keep chasing, not something you inherit. Where you are allowed to say, I don't know. Where you are free to ask the next question and the next one after that. And that freedom feels light. It's not heavy with guilt or fear. It doesn't depend on rituals or authority. It just asks you to think clearly, live honestly, and care deeply. In a world where so much is unknown, some find peace not in certainty, but in curiosity, not in doctrine, but in discovery. They're not looking for perfect answers. They're looking for better questions, and those questions lead to books, conversations, late-night thoughts, quiet revelations, not written in stone, not shouted from a pulpit, just noticed over time, quietly, personally. That's why so many thoughtful people are leaving religion, not because they're lost, but because they've started to find something else, something honest, something that doesn't require them to pretend, something that grows with them instead of holding them still. They leave not to escape meaning, but to create it, and maybe that's the most human thing of all. Before you go, take a moment to tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I always find it fascinating to know where in the world these words are landing. If you'd like to hear more honest, thoughtful reflections like this one, consider subscribing. I've got many more ideas to share with you. Thanks for being here. I'll see you again soon. Hello and welcome to The Cold Reason. It's becoming more common now. You meet people who grew up religious, who once followed every rule and custom, and they quietly tell you, I don't really believe anymore. They're not angry. They're not dramatic about it. They just left. And many of them are thoughtful, well-read, and curious people. People who ask questions. People who listen closely to the answers and then keep asking. The kind of people who don't settle for something just because it's always been done that way. There's a quiet shift happening. More and more people with access to information, education, and tools for critical thinking are stepping away from religion, not out of rebellion, but because something isn't adding up anymore. This isn't a sudden reaction. It's a gradual process. 1,000 questions that don't get clear answers. A feeling that something doesn't quite make sense, even when everyone else seems convinced. It starts small. Maybe with a story, a miracle that defies physics, a talking animal, a global flood where all the species survived on one wooden boat. At first, people try to explain it. They say it's metaphor or it's above human logic. But when you keep learning about how nature works, how the universe formed, how disease spreads, or how psychology influences belief, the old explanations start to sound thin. And when intelligent people sense inconsistency, they dig deeper. Many leave religion because they notice that the moral teachings they were raised with don't match the texts they came from. They're told their religion is about peace and kindness, but then they read things for themselves. They read about slavery being condoned, about harsh punishments, about women treated as property. They start asking why these things are justified in holy books but condemned in modern society. The answers often involve complicated justifications or selective memory, and smart people don't look away from that. They keep reading. They keep questioning. Education plays a role, but not because it teaches people to reject religion. In fact, most educational systems avoid directly confronting belief, but higher education does something else. It teaches people how to think, not what to think. When someone learns how to evaluate evidence, how to ask the right kind of questions, how to detect logical fallacies, they start applying those tools to everything, including their beliefs. And this is where a quiet realization happens. Religion often places certainty above curiosity. Doubt is treated like a weakness, but in science, doubt is the starting point. The entire method is built on testing. revising, and correcting mistakes. So when intelligent people begin to see that religion doesn't follow that same path of openness, they start to wonder, why are we expected to stop questioning here? There's also the issue of diversity. Intelligent people often live in diverse environments. They meet people from different cultures, different beliefs, and they notice something. Everyone is just as certain. Everyone claims their faith is the truth, but the details don't match. The rituals, the prophets, the scriptures, they're different. So, if everyone claims they're right, but their beliefs contradict one another, then something has to give. Either everyone is wrong, or at least most are. It's statistically unlikely that any one tradition just happens to have been born in the one correct location with the one true story. That starts to feel arbitrary, especially when people's afterlife, morality, and social acceptance depend on which set of ancient stories they were told as children. Technology also accelerates this shift. In the past, religious institutions controlled information. You heard what your leaders told you. You read what was approved. But now, anyone can access ancient texts in their original languages. They can read commentary, criticism, archaeology, and psychology. A curious teenager with a smartphone today can find material that even 50 years ago was locked behind academic paywalls. And when people see patterns like how many religious rituals overlap with older pagan traditions, or how myths recycle similar themes, they start to rethink where these stories came from. There's another reason intelligent people walk away. They don't feel the need for supernatural explanations anymore. In earlier times, religion filled the gaps. Why is there thunder? The gods are angry. Why do crops fail? A curse. Perhaps. Why do we die? A divine test. But now we understand biology, meteorology, astronomy, and while there are still many things we don't know, intelligent people have become more comfortable with not knowing yet. Rather than inventing an answer to fill the silence, they also begin to notice something about the behavior religion encourages. It often rewards obedience, not honesty. Many are taught that it's wrong to question. That doubt is a temptation, but intelligent people don't see doubt as a danger. They see it as a tool. They understand that the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions is what leads to progress. Social dynamics also come into play. In some communities, belief is deeply tied to identity. It's not just what you believe, it's who you are, who your family is, who you marry, how you live. But smart people tend to value autonomy. They notice when belief is being used more to maintain group loyalty than to seek truth. When someone leaves a religion and suddenly becomes an outsider, it reveals something. It shows that the belief might not have been based purely on truth. It was also about belonging. That's a red flag for someone who values ideas based on evidence, not pressure. Even the concept of morality is re-evaluated. People are told that religion is the source of goodness, that without it, humans would descend into chaos. But intelligent people study history. They see moral progress over time, like the end of slavery, the rise of women's rights, the fight for equality, and notice that many of these shifts happened in spite of religious institutions, not because of them. Some of the greatest moral thinkers in history challenged religious norms. They stood up against them. They weren't praised for it at the time, but we admire them now. That makes people question whether morality is really dependent on religion at all. Even prayer is reconsidered when people study how confirmation bias works, how humans remember the hits and forget the misses, how deeply we want to see patterns even where none exist. They begin to see prayer in a different light. They see how the feeling of connection or answered prayer might come not from an outside force, but from the brain's own wiring, and that doesn't make the experience meaningless. But it does change what it means. More people now recognize that meaning doesn't have to come from being told a purpose. It can come from creating it, from relationships, from learning, from helping others, from understanding the world. You don't have to be told your life has meaning by a higher power. You can build it with your own hands, and that idea is deeply attractive to people who think critically. And then there's the silence of unanswered questions. When people ask, why does a loving God allow so much needless suffering? And the only answers they hear are, it's part of a plan. Or we can't understand it. That's not enough. Especially when they've spent years learning how to solve complex problems, how to analyze systems, how to think clearly. It's not arrogance. It's that the answers feel evasive, insufficient. Many don't leave because they hate religion. They leave because they expected more from it. They expected it to be as deep, as honest, as rigorous as the other things they value. And when it wasn't, they stepped back, not in anger, but with quiet honesty. Another reason people leave is because they begin to see the patterns. When they compare religions across the world, they start to notice how much they have in common, not in the truth they claim to hold, but in the way they function. There's always a creation myth, always a prophet or founder, always rituals, restrictions, rules, always stories about punishment and reward. And often these were shaped by the needs of the time. Agriculture, warfare, politics. The structure of belief often mirrors the structure of power. When people study anthropology, they see how early humans developed religious systems. They learn that religion likely served a survival function, binding tribes together, enforcing cooperation, keeping order. But now, society has other tools for that. We have laws, education, psychology, and shared human values. Once people see religion as a product of culture, rather than a source of truth, it changes everything. It becomes a human creation, not a divine revelation. And then there's the realization that being good doesn't require belief. When people meet kind, ethical, thoughtful individuals from entirely different religions or no religion at all, they start to see that morality doesn't belong to one group. Some of the most compassionate people don't follow any sacred book. And some of the cruelest actions in history were done in the name of belief. Intelligence pushes people to look beyond labels and see behavior. This shift isn't always easy. It comes with loss. For many, religion was community. It was family tradition. It was comfort during grief, hope during hardship. Walking away isn't always a decision made lightly, but intelligent people often care more about what's real than what's comfortable. They're not content just feeling safe. They want what's true, even if it's more difficult. They also start to question the fear that sometimes used to hold belief in place. Eternal punishment, rejection, fear of being wrong. But when people understand how fear affects decision-making, how it can be used to keep people in line, they grow more skeptical. They start to ask, if a belief system requires fear to survive, what does that say about its foundation? Some notice how religion adapts over time, not in response to new revelations, but in response to social pressure. Ideas that were once considered sacred, like the earth being at the center of the universe or women being subordinate, are quietly dropped or reinterpreted, not because of divine insight, but because society evolved. And this shows intelligent people that religion often follows progress. It doesn't lead it.